My name is George McGraw. My mother's maiden name was Mully. And some of you might remember Decker and Mully dry goods store in downtown Williamson. Well, Grandpa George was the Mully. And when he passed away, I was a young man in college, and I was the executor of his estate. Well, after long story short, cleaned out everything in the house. There were a couple of trunks laying around, and I'm just checking to make sure there weren't any $2 bills stuck in there. What do I find? But my great grandfather's Civil War memorabilia inside all these papers, and nobody in from my mother down, we didn't know that we had a grandfather or great grandfather that was in Company D of the 111th. So I took that home. A couple months later, I was in the Army and put it away. And it was not until I retired that I said, well, I'm going to find out all about what Isaac was. So I started interviewing various historic societies. Our first project was we were trying to find the ancestors of the Company D soldiers. And from there, we just started to research and writing for the Wayne County Times. And my very first article says, do you know where your grandfather was July 4th, 1893? Because I know where my grandfather was. He was at Gettysburg at the 30-year reunion. I've learned so much more about researching that I realized that you really got to go back. If you're the Civil War, you got to go back. And if you're a revolution, you got to come forward to tie all these pieces together. And it's just led me to spend a lot of time here because there's so many people that are very helpful to it. I started reading all these books, and this guy is an amazing character. You know, how he wrote a 900-page book in the 1890s without a computer and researched literally thousands of people. That just is absolutely amazing. Well, all this led me to the fact that those men that fought in the War of the Rebellion, which is the correct name for that. It's not the Civil War as we've all commonized it, or down south where they call it the War of Northern Aggression. No, it was the War of Rebellion was what Lincoln called it, and that's the official name of it. So I said, well, we need to really think about how we can recognize all of those men and their contribution. So the original thought process was we were going to try and reproduce this monument, which is the 111th monument at Gettysburg, and put it out in the square. And then I got talking to this guy, the artist that we were talking to about doing that, and he convinced me that we should really think about doing something unique and something new and something different. So as we researched, we found that on July 2nd, 4 of the color bearers of the 111th were killed. And we know this because there's a number of testimonials. The regimental chaplain, Chaplain Brown, wrote it was about a 6-page testimonial that he gave at the 1886 reunion describing what happened. And what happened is we decided we were going to memorialize what happened to those 4 guys. So what happened was Judson Hicks is carrying the flag and he's shot. Once in the head, twice in the body, was killed. Payson Derby picks up the flag. There's a lot of different interpretations of that, and I'll read one of them. Some of you probably know who R.L. Murray is, right? Okay. In his book, The Redemption of the Harper's Ferry Cowards, he writes, the color bearers in the other units were always inviting targets for the Confederates. As the 111th advanced through the swale, their national color bearers was also struck down. Sergeant Judson Hicks was carrying the Stars and Stripes at the head of his regiment when he was shot through the head and 2 balls went through his body, killing him instantly. Quick as lightning, Corporal Payson Derby leapt forward, recovered our national banner, raised it in the fold, and flirting it defiantly in the face of the enemy. Now, there's a lot of other writing, and then he's shot. William Hart carries the flag for a while. He's shot. Payson dies. Wilson loses his right leg. The fourth soldier that carried it that day was wounded, and he carried it for the rest of the day because it was almost at the end of the day when he was shot. And he died 4 days later. Judson, Payson, and then this guy is just there to defend the flag bearers because that was really what happened. The first thing in battle you want to do, you want to kill the officers, and then you want to kill the flag bearers because that's the morale of. So all that led to this monument, which will be dedicated August 22nd, and it's going to be called True Valor at Gettysburg, because clearly that's what those men exhibited. Okay, so as we started to research, and you start one soldier, and then suddenly you've got another soldier and another soldier and another soldier, and they all lead to these so interesting articles that tell about the men and their families and what was happening to them, what happened to them. We've gotten articles and diaries that describe their life in Andersonville prison. And just amazing things. And one of the things we found was that a little history of the 111th. The regiment was mustered, which means that's when they got their uniforms and were all officially sworn in, was in August of 1862. They left, got on a New York Central train. They thought they were heading to Washington to aid in the defense of Washington. They got to Baltimore and they got rerouted to Harper's Ferry because somebody said, hey, Stonewall Jackson's running around there with 9,000 troops and we need to go figure out what he's doing. So they sent these green guys. When they went through Baltimore, they still hadn't received any weapons. They had uniforms, but no weapons. They get to Harper's Ferry around September 5th. They do finally give them some weapons, but on the 15th, they're down in the valley. Stonewall Jackson is up on the top with 10,000 Confederates and a whole lot of artillery. So guess what happened? 9,000 of them were surrendered. The management, the officers were not real good early in the war. Some were good, some were not. Political appointments and financial, who knows who. So these 9,000 guys got sent into what was called parole because they swapped. Nobody wanted the other guys prisoners, so you take them, but they can't fight until we exchange. So at Harper's Ferry on September 15th, this young soldier, John Desborough, was killed. Clyde, you're right, Clyde. And his corporal, Manly Stacy, wrote voluminous letters home to his father about this. So he wrote this one letter telling his dad about young John dying on the 15th. And the next day, he and some of the other guys from the company were going to bury him, and John was going to carve a wooden grave marker so that the family could hopefully come and collect the body and bring it back home later on. So that got me thinking that whole concept needed to be preserved. So Gary Castile, the fellow that's doing the sculpture work, did this, and this is what's called a Conti drawing. Back in the 1860s, photography was just starting. So you wonder how they got drawings and pictures in the papers and magazines. Well, they did what they call a Conti drawing. They used a special piece of paper, and this kind of paper, and they used pencil first, and then they used chalk, and then they sent this drawing to an engraver who created a plate, and then that was what they used to print. So this is a Conti drawing of Manly, Stacy carving, and then these other guys burying John Desborough. And my fantasy is that one of these other guys was Isaac, my great grandfather, because he was in the same company. He was 19, so they probably knew each other. So in my wildest dreams, that's him.